What's up, guys? Omar Farouk here, co-founder and CEO of Glorify, the e-commerce focused design tool, product focused design tool now that you all love, of course. And welcome to our next edition of the Path to Glory podcast. We're so excited that you're here. For those of you who are new on the Path to Glory, we bring to you successful entrepreneurs and experts and deep dive into their glorious path to glory. And of course, extract some gems from their knowledge and expertise. And on today's podcast, I'm super delighted to welcome to you Jose Caballer. Jose is a UX strategist, a facilitator, and he has helped CEOs, CMOs, and design leaders align their brands, customer experience, and business goals. Just a quick little introduction about Jose, just further into this introduction. Jose studied graphic design at the Art Center College of Design in California. He then went on to put his design expertise to use at the dot-com boom at Razorfish, one of the first digital agencies in the 90s. In 2001, he started his own digital agency called The Group. That's GROOP Group, where he worked with diverse creative clients such as AI Gore, Jamie Oliver, Thomas Keller of the French Laundry, Alice Waters of Chess Panisse. Man, these are a big mouthful. And the Edible Schoolyard Project, and corporate clients like Scripps, MySpace, Disney, and Nike, and over 30 startups, including OneDrop, Causecast, and Savings.com. Today, he combines his 20 years of design and business experience with his passion for teaching and training thousands of professionals on webinars and in workshops worldwide. And we're so lucky, really lucky to have him on our podcast today, where he will teach us on how to create brand-oriented user experiences for online business. And let me just give you a little pre-frame. Things are going to get really magical and mystical with Jose. I've been to some of his workshops. We actually hosted a workshop with him in London, and it usually gets quite magical, as I said. So guys, hold on to your seats. This is going to be exciting. Just wanted to add my personal experience also, where I actually originally discovered Jose was when he pioneered creating the online design content channel and community called The School. It's spelled SKOOL. School, just for your information, which has now been rebranded, as some of you guys may know, The Future, which you may know is currently being run by none other than Chris Do, and who's Jose's very good friend. And Jose has brought to the design community tons of value since then and before that, in fact, and giving and encouraging the sort of sixth sense, I would call it, the sixth sense of strategic and intuitive design thinking. I've had the privilege of having Jose participate in an event in London we did 2 years ago, as I said, and the experience there along with his online training has definitely impacted the way I think about design, as well as many other people that I know, and in a global sense as well, which is why we're so privileged to have him on this podcast. Now, let's welcome Jose Caballer to the podcast. What's up, Jose? How you doing?
Hey, man. Wow, that intro was very exciting. I'm getting excited about this guy. Who is this guy?
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here first and foremost, to take your time from your busy schedule to be here with us. It's just amazing, man. So I want to get into, we always, with the Path to Glory, all of our guests, we always get started from the roots. Where do our guests come from? And what brought them to where they are. So let's start off on that note in the beginning of this podcast. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Not just Jose Caballer, the creative entrepreneur, but also Jose Caballer before he became the entrepreneur, if you will.
The reason why that's a good question is because sometimes we go straight into talking about entrepreneurship and success and how to do it and like steps and all those things without like understanding the history of the person or getting to know person deeper. So thank you for that. At a real basic level, as a designer and as a designer in digital specifically, I got there from a unconventional kind of path. I grew up in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean. And my father was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor for the first part of his life, and then became a social public health counselor, and worked for the government for the next 40 or 30 years of his life in the space of public health. But I left my home fairly early at 17 and moved to Pasadena and pursued design, because ironically, I actually found out about design because I was drawing at church one Saturday, and somebody saw me and said, "Wow, that's really good." And they showed me, they said, made some corrections. I was drawing a car, and I said, "Well, how do you know all about this?" And the gentleman's name was Gary Smith. I still remember this. He said, "Well, because I'm a car designer." And I'm like, "Whoa, you can do that." And he showed me his portfolio the next week. And I said, "Wow, that's what I want to do." And he said, "No, there's more." And the following week, he had another friend that was also attending Art Center show me his product design portfolio. And I said, "No, that's what I want to do." Phones and like objects and like all these things were in his portfolio. But that guy, Jimmy Chen, I actually remember all their names. He said, "The money is in graphic design." And I'm like, "Ooh, I'll do that." I was very entrepreneurial. Like, the money's in graphic design, but it's also discovering as a creative how to translate what you love doing into a career. So I didn't like make any decisions as to looking at other colleges. I heard Art Center College of Design, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's where you go. And I've always had this very unidirectional, almost like if I have blinders on, where I take on an objective. I didn't know that it was a very expensive school. I didn't know that it was a very exclusive school, and also famous in the realm of design for a lot of things. It's one of the top 3 schools in the world for what the creative professions are that you can do. Product design, car design, graphic design, advertising, film, photography.
And the list is endless, right? It's so broad. Like once you get, if that becomes your career path or choice, it's just insane.
Even more so now with digital. So when I went through the program and when I graduated, it took me 4.5 years. When I graduated, I ended up going to New York for a lot of reasons. But that was a very seminal point in my career, and starting in digital in 1996, it was super before or early. So one of the things that I've seen multiple times before where we are now is that you see the ideas before the ideas become businesses and ideas. Like, video networks, with overlays for e-commerce, those were things we were prototyping in 1998, 1999 as a possibility. And of course, then the technology catches up, or doing, 20 ideas for, social networks, before, Facebook became the norm in 2007. And each kind of cycle, the dot-com boom was really about shifting to digital, and everything that can be digital will be digital, which is a famous quote from Jeff Dodges on an interview with 60 Minutes. He was the founder of Razorfish. And then like after the bust, and that was a really beautiful time. I love downturns because they are really where you can incubate innovation and the real things happen. And I started freelancing after I left Razorfish in 2001. And I had all these visions for like this beautiful space of like creativity, and where a person can bring themselves and work together in a collective fashion. Like I always channel some like socialist and like, kumbaya concepts, into what I want to do as business. And I started the group, which was really where a group of people, and we're consulting on design and technology, and might as well call it that. But it was early on, and the one thing as a final kind of component of how you are being in the world, or how you navigate the world as an individual, it always has a lot to do with your roots and with who you are and where you come from. And when you start looking at your ancestry, you start understanding why you do what you do. And my father, and then my grandparents, and like all of the family on my mother's side being pretty much about evangelism, and like, wanting me to become, a pastor in the church, that affects you, right? That kind of like you're groomed for that. But I became a designer, and then I looked more into my history and like my great grandfather on my father's side, et cetera. And he was a journalist, my great grandfather, and a socialist, or I guess back then as communist. in Puerto Rico, who was a big advocate for, anti, basically imperialistic, capitalist, the U.S. basically. He was a writer about that, and then ultimately, if you look at those two things, and you look at all the business ideas that I've done, and the idea of liberating creatives and of empowering the creative class, which what I was doing with the school in the realm of business, it ultimately was driven by those inclinations, but also because I already had seen the movie, early on in the 90s and building my agency, and I knew that this was going to continue in the world globally. So even the user profiles of the people that we were targeting or that we were working to do, to service, to give benefit to, were people like me, people of color, people with curly hair, people of basically people from developing countries and from the world that are the children of colonization. So ultimately now I look at our community and at the community that gravitates towards my message, which what I'm doing today with the Systm. And it's me replicated over and over again around the world. They're like, yeah, we can do this, and we're global, and it's digital, and there are no barriers to success, regardless of gender, race, or any kind of aspect.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of dive deep into your inner sort of motivation that took you on this path. All of it, I guess, rooted down in upbringing and past experiences, and like you said, ancestry, which is really interesting. And I think I totally relate with that because myself coming from Sri Lankan parents, first generation, and they raised me in Spain. Well, they tried to raise me as a Muslim boy in Spain, which is not easy. Where Spain is all about partying and siesta and enjoying life and stuff, and they literally try to force me down the opposite end, which is interesting. And then so that mental clash in me when pushed me, just sort of almost launched me into the world of a variety of experiences. I just wanted to experience as much as possible, and I think sometimes you get these chain reactions if people force you and pull you, and like emotionally, mentally, it's something tends to happen in your soul where you just want to release yourself into the world and find yourself. But the subtlety about what you spoke about in your experience was interesting because you had two polar opposite worlds. You seem like a very spiritual person. I mean, when you talk about your past, it sounds very spiritual. Like for me, we've had people in the podcast, and it's usually, quite straightforward experiences. But you go just a few layers deeper than that. What's made you, the spiritual being that you are today?
What's interesting is that I'm also very object oriented and very goal driven, and I have to ask the questions as to why and how. Something at the roots of it is in order to really be able to get to where I want to go. And one of the things that came up, and when you go look back at your career and you see what makes you successful, for me, for example, as a facilitator or even as a designer of experiences for people, that sixth sense, which you called, and that intuition, or that je ne sais quoi, that a creative person has, that people see and then gravitate towards, and it makes you successful, usually is driven by what we just talked about, which is the conflicts in who you are, because in the intersection between the opposites, and it could be more factors, but let's make it two. In your case, being from Sri Lanka, being a Muslim boy from Sri Lanka, trying to grow up in Spain, the clash of those two cultures and you reconciling that is really ultimately what creates who you are, and it creates the X factor in your delivery. So people we usually are in resentment or in regret of who we are, and accepting who you are, all sides, and understanding that that's really the secret formula of your essence, of your brand, is really ultimately the gift, right? Because then you can act from truth, and you can really be present and prescient to your unique point of view, which is what creates the future. So your gift is usually your wound and your your unique value proposition, to use business terms, is usually a result of the good and the bad of who you are, in a judgment kind of good and bad.
Absolutely.
People are over intellectualized that there's only good, but there's really the integration of light and dark. The concepts in spirituality.
Absolutely, both experiences count to, you know, really driving, projecting your values to the future, right? Without it, I mean, without dark and without light, or without the good and the bad experiences of our past, like, what can you create in the future? You know, what wisdom can you bring? Which is really interesting.
Well, in product development and design, you know, you look at the needs or the problems and challenges. You know, there's the framework of, you know, problems and jobs done, you know, where you always contrast the delta between like what somebody's struggling or suffering from and how to meet it. And if you can deliver that, you build, you know, resonance and people will buy, right? So that's something that in
absolutely.
in sales.
It's interesting how you're translating that to design, because it's literally pain, problem, empathy, solution, and it's you know, just using that, you know, whatever, you know, the empathy that we have to actually drive solutions forwards is a very special experience. I want to actually, just before we get into the design conversation, Jose, I want to just ask you one last question before we jump into that. You know, I read in one of your descriptions online that you're a meditation enthusiast, right? I've followed you online. I've seen that you often talk about meditation. What kind of meditation do you use, and how does it help you as an entrepreneur?
You know, I use a lot of different modalities, you know, guided meditations using apps. I use Calm, which is really nice because it's daily themes. It's like a little mini sermon every day on a theme. And usually the themes are really, no matter what the theme is, it's going to be appropriate to something in your life. Zen meditation, which is a little bit harsher and more like, you know, presence and like, you know, the Zen stick. It's like, you know, be present versus getting distracted in your thoughts. Walking meditation, which I experienced, and it was like, wow. I even experienced swimming meditation in India. And the one thing I really experienced in India on my journey over the last 6 years was Qigong, which I was like, wow, this is like amazing. Like, and it's the ability to move energy and to like, you know, move very slowly and have your body and your breath be connected. And, you know, the connection between the physical, the breath, and the mental, you know, is ultimately what you learn from meditation. But the main benefit, I think, is once you're aware of your breath and of your thoughts, and you know that they're just thoughts. So like the idea of like the watcher watching the watcher, like you're watching your thoughts and saying, this is a thought, and it's only a thought. And noticing when you're stressed out and how you breathe, you know, and like I stop breathing and my breath becomes really shallow when I'm stressed or when I'm nervous, and that creates anxiety. It makes you more present in conversations that might be difficult, or in presenting, or in negotiation. Like if you can become a Zen master, if you can become present and calm in any condition, that really ultimately drives, you know, a lot of success in entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship, it's a journey of uncertainty, it's a journey of challenges. There is, like I call, you know, I use a metaphor when I talk about building Burning Man camps, which is a whole different topic. And I say, everything is always going sideways. There is never the right direction. You know, it's like an airplane's, you know, people think that, you know, autopilot is going to the exact location, but the reality is the plane is being buffeted by wind. It's buffeted by, you know, all these different conditions. And the autopilot really just tracks the location, but the airplane is always going in the wrong direction. And then it adjusts a little bit to the right direction, then it adjusts a little bit in the right direction, and then it adjusts a little bit in the right direction. And that's how autopilot actually works to get to your destination. Meditation is the same. You're always going to be thinking, you're always going to be in like, oh, we're here, but then you have to go back to the breath. You have to go back to the breath. You have to go back to the breath. So ultimately, that's a great metaphor for entrepreneurship, because you always have to go back to your vision. You have to always go back to your goals. You always have to go back to being present to what is and to what you're going towards, not to what's happening in the current moment, because it's always going to be wrong. There is never a moment where everything is exact, perfect, or great. There are moments of greatness, but you know that you got there through a lot of turns and twists. And if you can't manage that as a person at an emotional and cognitive level, it's really difficult to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, especially the parallels you drew there, kind of reinforced what I sort of already knew. But the parallel you drew was a great example, the flight example, for instance. I obviously, when I discovered that, there's so many different forms of meditation quite a while back now, I was lucky enough to be thrown into this world a few years ago. And one of the biggest discoveries and breakthroughs for me was that I discovered you can meditate with your eyes open, for example, right? There's a misconception that you have to be in this perfect environment with, meditation music and, like quiet time, no distractions. I mean, all those things definitely help, but you don't have to be in that. I'm not kidding. I've meditated while driving. I think driving is the best meditation.
It's a great meditation.
It's a beautiful meditation. Some of the breakthrough experiences I've had is driving, on long drives. This is so healthy for my mind, which is special, man. But yeah, man, I think for our young community of entrepreneurs, ranging between startups and starting to some of whom are enterprise level, getting into establishing their businesses, building revenue and on the growth stage. There's a variety of stages of businesses that work that are in our audience, and I think using this practice, it can be a big game changer. At whatever stage you are in your business. Yeah, man, let's dive into your really, really long, successful career that you've been on this journey. You spoke a little bit about Razorfish. Some of the things I want to kind of speak about, the experience I've had by following you, in the early days when you started the school, for instance. I had a challenging time working in a corporate environment. I couldn't, as a designer, I always felt belittled in very corporate meetings, if you will, with the CEO, president, different stakeholders. I always felt like the person that was the quiet guy in the corner. But people like yourself empowered myself as a designer to step forwards and bring real solutions forwards. I knew those solutions existed in my mind, but it was something that I felt that, maybe, you as a designer, you almost feel cursed that you don't have the business sense. But once you actually start to learn business and then you combine it with your design thinking, it becomes a unfair advantage, I would say, which, I've been, very grateful to have. And I think part of that reason why I have that is because of, discovering yourself and community leaders like yourself, which has been a breakthrough for me. Tell us a little bit about what happened through your career as you started giving back to the community as you did. At what point you decided to do that?
Yeah, the struggles. I built an agency over 12 years, and that journey is super crazy, obviously always is, and we got into the Inc. 500, in 2009 and in the US, and it was a great feeling. It's just a list of the 500 fastest growing businesses, and you actually pay for it, and like you apply and you have to show your numbers. But that was amazing. And but in 2012, when I was just like, by 2010, I was like ready to I could have kept growing the business and like eventually potentially sold it, which usually is great because you get an earn out over time, but it could take 20 years. And I didn't see myself like as a 56-year-old man running an agency, and my inclination was to build an online business, and part of that was, for full transparency, influenced by Timothy Ferriss and the 4-Hour Workweek that I read in 2007. And I was reading, early on, like Gary Vaynerchuk and like, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And like, I was always very entrepreneurial and interested in like what the business side of things, even though I wasn't a business guy, I was a creative, but I really listened and was really present to learning and to understanding. So the school came up as a concept. It's like, teach what you know. And I knew, how to run an agency from my experience and the way that I ran it. And the idea that if you're, that anybody's an expert as long as you're teaching something that you actually have experience with, that gave me the kind of like, and like the British say, I'm very cheeky. I read it and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go do it. And like, who cares if it's, so I really created the reality of me as an expert an understanding from advisors, like Linda Weinman from lynda.com. She sold it to LinkedIn for $1.5 billion. She was an early influence, and I met with her and, talked about this, and she's like, yeah, if anybody can build it, you can. And that's what really started the journey of the school. And if my struggle was learning business or being powerful in the realm of business as a creative, I'm teaching that journey to others. It's my direct journey. It's almost like reality education. And that became, the future where, I shared with Chris, who was making the transition from a traditional motion graphics agency to understanding digital and to understanding strategy. Because most agencies and most creative professions are very narrow and specialized, because that's, the way that you can grow the business model. And the future, I knew from being at Razorfish and from running my agency, was one where design, business, marketing, and all the components and technology were together, and that required a whole new type of designer who can actually, at a minimum, understand those things. And even as an entrepreneur, you need to understand design, marketing, technology, and business, not necessarily as a vertical expertise in all of them, because you can't be an expert in all those things, but you have to be really versed in what the value is of those things, and respectful and empathetic of all the roles in a project. Steve Jobs is always a really perfect example that everybody brings up. And the reason why Steve Jobs could do that from that point of view was really ultimately, if you look at his education, being very non-traditional, where he went and studied all the things, typography and like spirituality. And, his favorite book was, the autobiography of a yogi. If you read Steve Jobs' biography, all the secrets of like how you become that master are in it, if you model exactly what he kind of did. And when you asked me earlier about what, made me seek the spiritual journey, a part of it is that I knew the answers to a lot of the questions I had that were bigger than just like, can I make a business grow, were in there. So, I feel all those things were successful, but maybe never completed. Like, I felt a certain sense of dissatisfaction. And I shared recently in a podcast or in a video that I did with Chris that, it impacted me. I was very devastated by leaving kind of the school and the split. And I didn't feel like continuing the school and like competing with Chris and continuing to build that parallel. So I kind of walked away for 3 years and went to consult and to really pursue the questions, both the spiritual and the journey of self-discovery. I mean, I hate calling it spiritual because it sounds so kind of like, pedantic and woo-woo. I don't like to give things categories. So more it's kind of finding the sources of power in yourself, of personal power. So going back to from the inspiration of Timothy Ferriss to kind of leave my agency and build a platform that created the ability to have some freedom, not the pressure of, being at a job, or even when you run an agency, you still have the pressure. Your clients are your job, and you have all those expectations to be beholden. But then, it takes a different level of learning to learn how to grow an online business, and a business that's based on e-commerce and that's based on, online sales. And that abstraction between a physical business where you meet the people and deliver value, like if you have a shop in the corner and a person walks by and they come in and, oh, I need that, and you give it to them, they pay you, that's easy to understand conceptually. But when it's all intermediated through screens and through ads and through content and through all these very kind of like
flat
publishing
surface
things, flat surface, people people can't even conceptualize it. The designer then becomes a super valuable and an important component of that, because you are designing the reality of all of the experiences. The interface becomes the message, and the messenger or the creator of that experience and that reality is really ultimately the designer and the UX designer and the technologist, obviously, because it has to function. So the relationship between how the designer, the technologist, and the marketer and the business person have to interact in order to create a reality that produces results for a goal of some entrepreneur or some business. It's so important that really my quest over the years of not, after leaving the school, where how do you get those 4 factors to interact, align, and do it. And the secret that allows someone to success is how to get those things to be in sync. And people believe that the sync is really your leadership, your vision, and your control, but it isn't. It's actually surrendering control to the user and to the profiles, and navigating and steering the business really from the user first, customer development, which is what Steve Blank calls it, and a lot of the literature around lean and around how to develop software, but more so, and this is where parallel spiritual practices, that you're surrendering to the users to some degree, but you still have to have your vision and your essence manifested, your brand, at the same time. So it's like a Satori in Zen. It's like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And you're like, what? So, if you have to surrender to the user and surrender to who you are essentially, but not be attached.
Component, almost.
Not be attached to the actual output, but to the mechanics of matching your output to the needs of the user and to your essence in real time almost, because to build an online business successfully fast, you have to have that real time kind of ability. If you look at the two things as two vectors, one being A and one being B, B being let's say A being the essence of who you are, the first thing, and B being the needs of the people you're serving. And then you look at the middle in between A and B is let's call it X. The X factor is always that whatever that output is, it could be an image in your e-commerce store. It could be the experience of your landing page, and the messaging of it has to match and speak directly to the needs of your user. And usually it's 2 or 3 different user types, maybe 4. But a mistake that entrepreneurs make all the time is this is for everyone. I want it to scale. I want it to be big. But you can't speak to everyone at the same time, no matter who you are, no matter how masterful you are as a communicator, and no matter how well distilled and synthesized your message is, which when that is the case, you have the ability to impact more people. But at the, it starts going into the realm of cliches and riddles when it gets too broad, because the broadest form of communication is just vagueness and something that applies to everyone. The more specific a communication is, oh my God, I have that problem from a headline and I want to check out this product and go to the next step, the better, right? So without user-driven design of an experience, and without an authentic expression of the idea, the brand, the message, the essence, the voice, all these aspects of what you are putting out, and without knowing how to masterfully produce those things and control the outcomes of it, it's really difficult to build an online business. And people's heads explode because they think that's too complex. It's actually simpler than it is. The mechanics and the tools and the techniques and the platforms and all of the work that it takes to produce those things can seem and be complex, but the underpinnings of how that is driven are simpler than most people think. It's just driven by the brand, the essence, the user needs, and the business goals that you have. If you can align and triangulate those things in the realm of software, in the realm of your e-commerce platform, you can, grow anything. If you can align those things in your real life, who you are, the personal development aspect of finding yourself, who your people around you are, your spouse, your friends, your kids, your employer, your clients, and their needs, and understand them and really meet them. And likewise your own needs, because you're a user in your own system, and meet objectives and goals together, co-creation, you can then really reap the benefits of a great life. So if the parallels between creating an e-commerce or an online business and spiritual, and let's not call it spiritual, let's call it having a good life, and the tools and techniques and containers or philosophies and practices are very similar. So the parallels I found at the journey at the end is that if you compare inside the realm of practice of a great life, and the realm of practice of building a great business online, the principles are the same. They're just juxtaposed and applied differently.
Yeah, so, again, that's a very profound parallel you just drew for us, and it's actually interesting because it makes total sense because the human experience is applied anywhere and everywhere, right? And so whether you take that on whether you take that experience to your product or whether it's in your life, it's the same components working. And what you've kind of magically sort of articulated was really profound. But something that I really highlighted is the fact that it all starts from surrendering to your user base, which I just used your word, which is to surrender to your user base, which makes total sense because in essence that is showing empathy, that is showing understanding, commitment to them first and foremost. And I guess on your side, you can only do your best to then accommodate them with your brand, with your assets, with your product, and just. I think one of the things that I've noticed, I took your course on UX. I think it was on that platform. What's the platform?
Creative Live.
CreativeLive.com. I really enjoyed that course because it gave me a lot of insights on how to conduct a live workshop on UX. And we use a lot of those concepts internally in our team now, which is great. I really want to get down to business now. There's a point where I just want to sort of really pick on your brain as much as I can, and not just for our audience, but for myself as well. Creating a brand, I know you touched on a lot of this, but creating a brand-oriented user experience for online businesses. A lot of the community here, the Glorify community, are here for one reason all alone, is to build and flourish and make flourish their online e-commerce businesses. There's also a smaller audience coming into the community who are selling digital products and service-based products as well. Some of them newer than others, but it all comes down to the same concept that they need to understand to make sure that these businesses flourish. So they've got all the content they need in terms of setting up their businesses, working the platforms, whether they're selling on Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, if they're selling a service on Fiverr.com perhaps, or Upwork, or wherever else they may be, leveraging platforms like LinkedIn, a digital product, they might be using funnel systems like ClickFunnels, Lead Pages, Udemy, marketplace type platforms. Wherever you are, it's important that they need to create a brand-oriented user experience, as we established earlier. But what is this? What's the steps that they can take to build, some practical steps for the layman, someone who's new, to build a brand-oriented user experience? What does that mean?
So from a process standpoint, if you look at even what you're saying, like, a brand-oriented user experience, the first step is really understanding your customer really well. And the question people ask is always, well, I don't know who my customer is. I kind of have this idea. My usual input or advice is that if you're starting something, or even if you're a mature company and you're having to shift, your business to e-commerce because of the current kind of global situation, in which people have been having to do anyway because Amazon has been eating their lunch, and also the shift demographically, from, if you look at the data, millennials and Gen Z, huge amounts of increases in e-commerce and especially mobile commerce.
Absolutely, totally.
Because nobody wants to go to a store. There's a statistic
that says that
e-commerce. Store? What's a store?
Yeah. Sorry. There's a statistic.
The statistics are...
there's a statistic that says that e-commerce has skipped 10 years. I just want to touch on that point you were saying about e-commerce having evolved during COVID. It's the opportunity is there. It's just leveraging it and how to leverage it. But sorry, you were saying
it got real. Yeah.
Like
basically before there was pressure from a competitive forces. Now there's necessity from the reality of life. So those two factors, were bound to meet in one way or the other to where things became digital even faster. So the best way to explain it will be to give you a story of a use case of an actual collaborator, client, co-creator, somebody that I consulted for, who happens to be my old boss at Racerfish, Chef Dotches. After doing the agency and leaving, he started a data-driven agency that he sold, became Sprinkler. or to Sprinkler, which, it's about managing social media, et cetera. And then started a company called OneDrop.today, which is a diabetes platform. He was diagnosed with adult onset diabetes at 47, which is maybe 5 years ago. And then he's like, how do you manage that? So I met with him in Austin he lived there at the time. He had multiple ideas, for businesses to start. And we kind of conducted, this kind of process that I developed at my agency to identify the brand, the users, and his business goals, and trying to correlate and align those. And from doing it for the multiple ideas, but then really just sensing what he was really passionate about. And he calls it intellectual congruity, which is like, he's excited about it intellectually. I said, the fact that you have diabetes and that you had to deal with the health system and all your disappointments with it, and that you creating the platform for that versus some of your other ideas, I think will be a better idea to pursue. And we did that strategy together, and then worked on the investor deck to articulate the concept. He raised a small amount of capital and then worked to launch it. Then has since raised multiple rounds, the latest one being 100 million from one of the big pharma companies, because he combined his knowledge of data, his knowledge of marketing, and his knowledge of software development, and the fact that he had diabetes, all four of those things, into creating a platform that was truly like world class in that space, from the app to the product to the services to all of the things. It's like he's designing it for him. The point of that whole story is that what I was saying at the beginning is that the advice that I give entrepreneurs, specifically entrepreneurs, is that usually your first business or a business is solving a problem that you yourself have. So if I look at the school and at what I created, bringing business education to designers, it's a problem that I had 10 years before in growing my agency, and I had knowledge on how to solve it. So he has knowledge on how to solve the diabetes problem. There are people who are drop shippers or who are like, just creating a business for the opportunities. And that's fine, but you have to be able to channel and empathize like with the needs and the problems of your users in order to be able to successfully create a solution. Being able to do something just from the numbers, and this is where analytical people and people that are doing businesses just for the increase do well, but also, again, it's a satori. Somebody who's very focused on the growth and the mechanics can definitely make something work to a certain degree and potentially become very successful and wealthy from it. But the truth is that most of the people who actually accomplish that have a very strong connection to their user based on what they're creating for them. It's seldom that you're going to find, any entrepreneur who's successful, even if what they're selling online, when they talk about their success, is like, here's a proven system in 7 steps that I use to, increase my sales from 6 figures to 7 figures, in 1 year or in 3 months and whatever it is. They sell the steps because the truth is that that's really the mechanics, what people perceive as what they need. And that's fine. So process is fine. But the connection and the intuition and the empathy is really sometimes the part that they miss, they leave out. And the people like replicate their steps and they're like, well, this isn't working for me. What's wrong with me? And you see Gary Vaynerchuk address this a lot. Not that I've seen him recently, but when I've seen him with people that are always like, well, how do I actually get to that? But if you listen to him, if you understand him, aside from the fact that he's a madman, he's really vested and like true to his understanding or intellectual congruity between what he's doing and what, and who he is and why he's doing it. There's always this alignment. So to give it to the process people, what are the 3 steps that you have to take to really build a successful combination of UX and brand? One is define your brand. Whatever method you want to do it with, you can do it. I mean, the method that I use, I actually got from Racerfish because I was on the process committee there. And it was a method of creating a brand statement in really rapid alignment with a large group of people. When you're doing it on your own, it's better to do it with a few people because you want the brand to be an expression of what others see, not of what you think. If you put out a brand that is your point of view, that's usually very violent. Like when the people feel like the brand is theirs,
egotistical.
They created it with you. Yeah, the ego is the enemy, ultimately, in any business. If you look at the best leaders, they have a high degree of empathy and EQ, emotional intelligence quotient. Any successful CEO, entrepreneur, or like a if you want to tell the difference between a Zen master and a successful entrepreneurial CEO, you'll notice that they're not very different. They become still, they become clear, they become empathetic, they have a sense of kindness to them. The people that ultimately behave from a pattern of, ego and conquest and growth can have growth and can succeed.
Yeah. There's a place for that.
But eventually they eventually run into problems.
Yeah, sorry, I do apologize. So they have a place in the world. The people that are ego driven, it's almost like the business models that exist for those type of forces are really like, property, for instance. It's a numbers game, right? The real estate, stuff like that. But whereas when you're talking about purely from a product basis, as you've been saying, numbers just becomes a tool, right? And as you said, you need to then use intuition to really work out your user's problem, because at that point, numbers just becomes a validation tool. You can validate your success, whether it's moving in the right direction or it's not. But ultimately, it comes to intuition, working with your users, empathy, to really get to the crux of the matter, and that's important. Whereas the sharks of the world won't necessarily get that. So you need to combine the numbers and the design thinking, the empathy.
Whole thinking, whole systems thinking is really important. And let's make something really clear. That's also really important for the 20th century. And I hate to bring it back to some of the broader concepts, but what I want to caution and really try to bring home to the people that are trying to succeed in their e-commerce business or in their businesses, and it's to not discount, the future without an E, Christo's, version of the school wouldn't have been born without the 5 years that I spend on YouTube and on, and doing content with him and creating like a real connection with the customers. The funnel was created by content. And I knew that because that was the advice that I was given by Linda Weinman, that you had to become an expert in order for people to buy your products inside the education space. So I had to make Christo an expert using content. He was an expert, there's no doubt about it. But we needed to start the show, that first episode, and have the discussion in an educated and in a way that people were like, oh my God, you're giving us all this knowledge, because you are an expert in what you know. So that was a first kind of point, and that's the key to creating content. Now, the difference between being a shill salesman of like, hey, I'm, when you see I love the selfie stick, videos on Instagram and on YouTube and Facebook of, and that's just a modality which is common in the filming of it. But it's like, hey, I'm Joe so-and-so, and I want to share with you like the success of my dropship business. And if you have $30,000 in the bank and you are not doing dropshipping, and it all becomes like these infomercials, and everybody can have an infomercial and a product sales pitch that's like that. I've always gravitated a bit away from that, not because of, just because everything has always been a little bit more like real, mindful, connected, and based on real experience. And that's all. That all comes from like personal development practices and from sharing authentically, and more on the side of like being a guide and a teacher than on the side of selling you something. So that really, and interestingly enough, at an intuitive level, that was something that was required for creative people to listen, because creative people as empaths and as empathetic, or as highly empathetic and highly sensitive people to BS, wouldn't buy, the top proven products and stuff. And if you look at, the tone of successful e-commerce sales pitches, the best pitches and the best product funnels and the best are really real stories that are told in an authentic way. Absolutely. And the product itself 100%. Sells itself. Yeah. The product itself usually sells itself. People think Apple is a great marketer. Apple is not a great marketer. the apple is a great
story
narrative. It's a great narrative imbued in the essence of their products as proof of what they're kind of believing in, you know, the quality, the creativity, it's just like, wow, like, you know, it hits a brand at all the levels. You look at OneDrop.today and you look at the kind of execution of the brand and of the design, and don't confuse logo and colors with brand. The brand is really the emotional understanding that a customer says, this is amazing. That's the brand. That's what you created. That's the mark that you made on a person's mind. It's an abstract concept. The minute that you think brand is logo, identity, or like the execution, you fail, because it's really the totality. And that's a concept that also comes from, you know, the more esoteric and the more spiritual, which is, you know, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. Brand is like that. You know, it's really the beginning and the end of the expression, not through the form, but through the spirit of what you do expressed in the form. So what I see all the parallels between brand creation and spirituality, you begin to see the, you know, Apple's a cult branding. It's an actual book called Cult Branding. When you create something that the future is a cult, and it's a real powerful one, and it's a cult focused on business and creativity. And it's for the creative class, and it's huge, and it's grown because of the realness. But underneath all of it, if I showed you all of the process documents of building the school then became the future, there is always, you know, the 3 user profiles of, you know, freelancer to agency, and an agency principal, and what their needs are, and speaking to those prioritized, and the brand essence of it being expressed, the truth of who we were at the time. And then now the brand expression is much more Chris's expression, and it shifted, the colors shifted, the photography shifted, the design shifted to express Chris more so as he became the leader of it. And my own expressions on what I'm doing now are very clearly mine. And people that resonate with that are beginning to identify more with a particular kind of flavor. So there is an ability to niche and to create a brand for almost any vector, or any flavor, or any kind of niche in the market, as long as you're able to create it really well and in control. That's a really long share, but hopefully there was some value in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of what you just said there, and I'm just trying to take it all in to produce some follow-up questions. Okay, so again, for our user base, what's interesting is that I think you threw a lot of curveballs at our user base, because in essence, what you spoke about is, you know, products need to have a level of authenticity. You know, brands need to have a level of authenticity. I'm totally with you, by the way, on the you know, the infomercial style, you know, selling like hotcakes type of product promos that you get in the online space today. I switch off instantly, and I think that's a natural tendency for creative people, as you described. I think, you know, that reconfirmed my belief that most creative people have this kind of sense that they tend to switch off for such styles of narratives. But again, there's, I think, a lot of the people in the startup community, you know, people are trying, especially in the context of COVID-19, people are on survival mode. You know, I've had plenty of entrepreneurs approach me. They have passion to drive business and create their own brands. You know, I think everyone would love to do that, but there's also this element of survival. But really, when it comes down to create long-term success in a product, it really comes down to, you can make anything a short-term success. You can sell oranges tomorrow and make it a short-term success, right? But if you wanted long-term loyalty, you need to build those foundations, which you set in stone, which is one of the things you said is that it's preferably, I believe it's preferable to be an expert in this space, to have depth in what you're selling, some form of depth. Maybe the concept is, the product is this idea which is an inch wide, but you have a lot of depth in that space alone, which then positions you clearly within that niche, or a niche within a niche, which gives you an advantage there alone. And so this is one things that you've recommended, and then building a brand on that, right? And building a product with intention more than just doing. But how could you, I want to throw a curveball back at you, because I think a lot of people in the audience might feel, hey, look, I might be trying to sell products on Amazon or eBay, or maybe trying to sell my digital services on survival mode. What kind of advice could you give to them?
How can you do that? How can you get the depth when you're just really selling, like drop shipping, like some great products?
Exactly. How can you get depth in what you're doing, and how can you discover that? And do you think ultimately, that's the end all and be all of a successful business, that to really define and set in stone those anchors?
It isn't and it isn't, because if you look at Apple from a success standpoint, most of the innovation was really Steve Jobs imposing his point of view on what quality meant or what users really needed. He wasn't really talking to them. He's like, I think this is what they need. He was being prescient into the future. So he's what I call a synthesis entrepreneur. He's synthesizing what he's feeling in a 360 kind of point of view, seeing it by another company, stealing it, and making a better version of it. That's common, and that doesn't negate, the person's success. That actually is a real great trait. And most entrepreneurs that are successful are very good at synthesis. But to answer your question very clearly and very specifically, can you create depth in a product that you might not be your first choice, or you're doing it out of opportunity? And the answer is yes. A good example from Zig Ziglar's The Secrets of Closing a Sale, which is an old book, but a classic, where he sold pots and pans, door to door. Most sales guys were just like, hey, ma'am, do you need pots and pans? A good price, I'll give you a discount. And they went on the offer, not necessarily on the product benefits of the pots and pans, where he basically, even though he couldn't afford them, he bought them and he cooked with them at home. And when he walked in, he said, I own these and this is what I made and I can show you actually, and would walk in and do a demo of look at how great the eggs are and it doesn't stick, and these are really amazing. And the person's like, oh my God, yeah, these are really nice, much better than mine. And yes, I'll buy them. So he created depth in his product by using it. So you might be selling, you have a drop ship business with multiple product types, in your repertoire, in your SKU list. And at a minimum, knowing what and asking customers why, and understanding their reasons for the purchases, or even just reading the reviews of the particular comments and understanding the motivations for someone to buy those specific products, but then more importantly from you, why do they trust you? What is it about what you're doing that they gravitate towards? And that usually will be in the form of a story, or the story of either the brand as a whole, or the products themselves on the PDP page, in the product description page, and telling that story in the thumbnails, not just the product views, but then also product attributes, product benefits, some nice pictures of the product in use, contextualizing everything into the reality of what is, so that the gap between the reality of I need or I might need this product and I have and I love this product is closed by everything that you put out. What you're creating is simply the feeling of this is how it feels using it, the same way Zig Ziglar did by coming in and doing a demo with the pots. So but in the digital realm, you have to do that through images. You have to do that by creating, beautiful, e-commerce images that will convert because of even the quality that they're created in, not just, that you have them. I see a lot of, I'm shopping for a product on Amazon, same product, multiple vendors. I look at the thumbnail images, and then I'll basically say, wow, these are really, I'm a designer, so these are really crappily produced and like, you know, and like a lot of janky type all over them. Let me go to another vendor. Oh, this vendor, ooh, it's a little bit more sophisticated. I'm going to buy that vendor, even if the price is higher, because you don't have to be a designer to notice the difference between shoddy and great. And this is something, and the last thing I'll say relative to this, to your listeners, is that the transition that we're making into e-commerce, design and quality and production become so much more important. Because in the past, you know, you can have a shop on the streets in London, you know, selling, I don't know, fish and chips and a yellow and red sign, or, you know, curry, you know, whatever it might be. And you got it at the quick, you know, sign maker in Helvetica or in a god-awful font, you know, and it's fine because people are walking by and they smell the curry and they know that they want it right now because they're hungry, and they'll walk in and they'll get it. It could be electronics, it could be fashion, it could be whatever. When you have retail that has line of sight in a physical realm, you know, you can really compromise a bit on the design of it. When you're on e-commerce, and especially now with very sophisticated businesses emerging faster, just even looking at the Glorify app, looking at, you know, a lot of these Airbnb, most businesses online that are very successful and are cult kind of brands online, especially emergent ones. The level of the great design is price of entry. So if you're an entrepreneur of any type, even if you're just looking at an opportunity and wanting to capitalize on it, you cannot discount design, story, quality, and the sheer volume and complexity and quantity of content that you need to create. So if you don't start with a foundation of understanding the quality needed, if you don't start by really understanding the user and having fidelity between what you say and what you do, or even in the product category that you're in, being able to articulate what the difference is between you and another vendor, even if it's simply quality of production. If you can't do those things at a basic minimum, it'll be hard to get traction. And that's why most people give up. I mean, if you think about it, the exit rate of entrepreneurial ideas in online, whether it be software, e-commerce, or services, et cetera, is pretty high. Entrepreneurship is not a it's a contact sport, and it has a lot of people give up. And then in this current situation, you know, there's people that are doing it because they have to survive. So you really have to quickly get real with what you are committing to doing, and to the quality of I call it fidelity, between the user, who you are, and what you're saying. Authenticity and clarity and fidelity become way more important than if, you know, you have a lemonade stand or a curry stand on the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in this day of age where everything's recorded online like a manifest, you know, so of yourself and everything your business has ever said and ever done. It's important to maintain authenticity.
Search is the ultimate truth sayer.
Google is the ultimate truth sayer today. I want to end this podcast. It's been an amazing session with you, Jose. Open my mind in different areas, reconfirmed and reconnected what I feel that I already knew, but was lost there somewhere inside me, which you tend to do, by the way, which is great. And of course, introduce new ideas, which I've connected with. So I want to mention to the audience, one of the things that, again, going back to sort of my personal experience on what I learned from you in the past, which is two things that I want to talk about to end this podcast, is Stylescapes and Teams. So we'll go back into the tangible rather than the conceptual stuff. And Stylescapes was something very interesting because this for everyone in the audience here today who's listening, all of these things, these concepts might be hard to internalize, articulate, but there are systems and processes that you can take tomorrow, today, with your teams, with your designer, with yourself if you're a designer, or use the Glorify tool to even create these processes for yourself. and Stylescapes is one of them, which Jose, I believe, was one of the pioneers and brought forward into the online space. Was the first time I ever heard of it for certainly. So, and I'd like to hear a little bit about the history of Stylescapes, in fact. But what's more important is how it actually works. It's a process that allows you to build, strategize what kind of brand you want to launch with, or what kind of brand you want to create for your product. And I'll let Jose talk a little bit about Stylescapes in terms of how the process actually works. And, I want you guys to listen intently, because this is something you can apply to your business tomorrow to make sure that you could perhaps use this process to create a brand that is receptive to your audience segment. Branding is of course an iterative process, and it requires evolving, but you need something to start with. And I think this is a brilliant way to get started. I've used it with a lot of clients of mine. I've used it internally in our own business, and it's worked flawlessly every time. Jose, can you talk a little bit about Stylescapes and how a little bit of the history and how it works, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, Stylescapes are born from digital. They were brought to me at my agency by my creative director, Henry Min, who was a colleague that I worked with at Razorfish. He got the practice by working at Digitas, which is a digital agency. I think the name Stylescape was already attached to it. And really ultimately the mechanic of it is, when you present designs in a digital context, you usually present a web page and have the client give you feedback. And they don't like this font, they don't like the copy, and that image isn't right. So they give you feedback, and you have to go back and iterate that single page, and it might happen over and over and over again. So what Stylescapes attempt to do, if you look at a brand identity, if you're designing something new or redesigning, or even just documenting an existing design system, colors, fonts, images, content, copy, in a horizontal way across multiple aspects of the business, the web page, the business cards and stickers, an interior scene, colors, typography, icons, all on one view, holistically, you have a better chance of getting agreement and approval of the direction, because conceptually you're showing the client, or yourself, even if it's for yourself, for your own business, because you have internal stakeholders, or even yourself as a stakeholder, the context of the expression of the design system holistically. And it's easier to say, oh, I can see it. Oh, this copy is not right on the website, but the colors and the stuff all works. Furthermore, if in the process of translating the attributes, the words and the kind of customer needs into a design system, you create multiple versions and present it, let's say, to a client, or look at it internally and look at what works in each of the versions, and look at what doesn't work for you in some of the versions. Like, I don't like the font here, but I like the font
I think
here.
that's really important, by the way. The excluding part is more important than not, right? People forget that it's great to know what you want, but it's also amazing and very refreshing to know what you don't want as well for your brand, aesthetic and design.
It's like triangulating, or like, I won't make it esoteric. I'll make it very concrete. Choice is something that people like. Like, if you give yourself or someone else that you're designing something for, or within your company, you're given one option, you're like, well, I have nothing to compare it to. That's why A/B testing is so important. You have A or B, C or D. When you get your eye test, they go like, this one or this one, this one or this one. Without contrast, you're basically like, I don't know why I don't like that. I don't have another option to look at. And that's a mistake. So the final thing I'll say is, what they try to solve is twofold. It's accelerating approval. It's avoiding the issue of, we heard you, here's what we think, here's a direction in the form of just a web page with the images. It looks really real. And that scares people. It's like, oh my God, when it looks so real and when it looks final, you're like, shit, I'm not going to be able to change this. No, this is wrong. This is wrong. People want to give their input. So that really avoids that. And more importantly, by giving the choice to say yes and no on different options. And then like if you show 3 Stylescapes, which are 3 fully articulated design systems that you can do quickly, because digital moves fast, like taking months to do all this, clients will just not have it, or you cannot even afford it to spend that much time. But getting to see the 3 options in the 3 directions,
yeah,
and triangulating what you like, and then coming up with the final option based on all the things you like. You were involved. You were like, I participated in this. This is mine. You give ownership to your client or to your stakeholder body as to the choices that were made. And no one wants to be told what to do, and nobody wants to be making decisions without options. So
absolutely.
That's one of the main reasons why they're so effective. And it's basically a tool for alignment at the visual level.
Yeah, I'd love to flash some stuff for the video. Guys, if you're listening to the audio version, I encourage you to check out the video version. We'll flash some examples of Stylescapes. I think it's just a very efficient way, as Jose described, to understand what direction you want to take your brand towards. And if
oh my God, I just Googled Jose Caballer and Stylescapes, and somebody created an entire Pinterest board of Stylescapes.
Oh, that's amazing. We've got to drop that link for you guys as well. So
and it includes the original template from the original core kit. Holy shit.
That template, by the way, was a lifesaver. And I totally understand the composition, because I studied motion design, and in motion design, layouts are really important, especially
narrative. The layout is a narrative.
Exactly, dynamic layouts, and you've basically take it through. It's a journey, through that horizontal layout. And I've seen people try to attempt other layouts for Stylescapes, like vertical, but square. But I think it's more effective, always more engaging and more effective and more streamlined to have it in that horizontal layout, because you start from one side and you have this beautiful experience moving left to right or right to left, consuming the content there, and you get a 360 view of what could potentially be and how this could be applied to your brand. Jose, man, it's been eventful. It's been amazing. Thanks a lot for taking your time again from your busy schedule to be here with us. Guys, if you haven't heard of Jose already, follow him, check him out. He's always doing workshops and content online. Follow him on Facebook. You're on Twitter, right, Jose?
Twitter, Instagram is the best.
Excellent.
It's just my name, Jose Caballer.
Perfect. Where else can our audience find you?
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's harder because you can follow me, but I don't have any space for more friends. Core is Magic is the URL for the futures landing page for me and what I do. And coming up soon, I'll be releasing a new YouTube and a new website. I'm working on those things now, but Instagram is probably one of the best places to follow me.
Awesome. Excellent. And last but not least, is any of your products like your, any of your work kits that you have to help businesses with their brand alignment or UX? Is that something we can find online? Yeah,
the Core is really the primary one, and Core is Magic leads you to that, and that's how to define your brand, your users, and your goals. And there's a new version that was released November of 2019, and it's pretty comprehensive.
So this is your brand strategy kit, right? Excellent. Okay.
UX-driven brand strategy and goals. It's really, I call it a creation engine for any business.
Awesome, guys. Go check that out. I think there's potentially massive value for yourself to use that as part of your process, your branding process. In fact, even getting if you're an entrepreneur, if you got a team in your team, if you got a design in your team, then onboard these systems and processes and make it part of your business startup culture. I think it's highly important. And teams are everything. One of the things that we learned last week in our last podcast is that people invest in teams, not products, and products can be fixed, right? So it's important to introduce these cultures and all the concepts that we spoke about on this eventful podcast. Again, Jose, thanks a lot for being here, man. I'll catch up with you guys soon. Everyone stay glorious. Give a massive shout out to Jose again. Take care, guys. Peace be with you.